Our guest speaker today is Reverend Tamara Labek, and she will be joining us via Zoom. She is an ordained Unitarian Universalist community minister. She is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, a chaplain, coach, mother, wife, author, singer-songwriter, and worship leader. She has served at the First Unitarian Shaker Heights and West Shore Unitarian Universalist in Cleveland, Ohio. She also has served nearly 10 years at All Souls in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please welcome Reverend Tamara Labek.
Good morning, everyone. I would love if you would wave at me. This is so exciting that I get to see who I'm speaking to. I will tell you, thank you. I have preached all around the country during this pandemic, and this is the first time that I actually get to look back at the congregation instead of preaching into a void. So I'm so excited to have been able to see your faces and experience the service with you. Thank you for making this possible. It definitely creates a better experience on this end. I hope it's an okay experience for you all as well. As was already mentioned, my name is Reverend Tamara Labek. I'm actually coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the home of the Cherokee, Muskogee, Kickapoo, and Osage nations, as well as 35 other tribes who called this land their home before forced removal. My pronouns are she, the she series, and they. I actually prefer they, but I understand why what I look like might invoke a she from our cultural shaping. But if you really want to respect me and my system, I'm a they. And frankly, and I'll make this argument throughout our time together this morning, so are you. And we'll get to that in just a minute. The most important thing about my pronouns, though, is not whether or not you get them right, but whether or not you're interested in respecting who the most important person is to do one's own defining. And that is, of course, ourselves. I would want you to be able to define you, and I would assume that you would give me that same respect. Now, the ultimate form of mutual respect, I agree, I would argue, especially given the current world that we're living in and the way in which we have historically and structurally marginalized so many identities in the United States over the past 400 years, is to allow people the opportunity to be able to define themselves. Now that's it about me. I want to redirect for just a second and talk about you. So you made it. The part of you that wanted to come to church today, or whenever you're watching this, if you're online, seems to have gotten its way today. And if you didn't read the blurb for today's sermon, or you just don't remember it, which I totally and completely get, or if you decided to just come or watch without even knowing what the heck you were getting into, good for you. I promise I will be as kind to you as I possibly can as we tread this new neural path. But in addition to the part that got you here today, there may actually be an opposing part of you that did not want to come to church today, who maybe would have preferred staying in bed or watching PBS Sunday morning, or maybe listening to NPR, or maybe reading the New York Times, or going for a walk in the woods. Or maybe I'm just the only one who has all of these parts. Now, maybe you attend a UU church out of compliance for a younger part of you that says, oh, well, this is what Sundays are for. Or maybe you come to church because of a rebellious part that says church isn't just for the typical churchgoer in Texas, it's for all of us. Or maybe there's a part of you that leverages your church attendance to fit in at work and says, oh yes, I went to church on Sunday. Or maybe you're gathering to work through some of your own religious trauma, or explore your relationship as a human, or explore your relationship with God, or just be in a community of like minds focused on a cultural revolution. That's my hope. But let me just say a quick thing about this little rebellion and revolution insight that I have latched on to lately. You see, rebellion is actually a reactive reinforcement of the mindset of the oppressor. Now, I'm going to repeat that just in case you want to capture it, or if you want to tweet it, or just allow your thinking part to be able to remember it. Rebellion is a reactive reinforcement of the mindset of the oppressor. So that means if you're rebelling, you might still be operating under the construct of the oppressor or even the values of that same oppressor. But a revolution, which is what I believe is what we're calling for today, a revolution requires moving beyond the binary or the polarity to a completely different and new way of thinking. Now, in what I'm inviting you to today, a revolution would be where all of your parts, all those parts like the ones that I talked about earlier, are welcomed and witnessed. They're appreciated, and if they're needed, even healed. And your witnessing part, that core part of you who can lead and console and choose between polarized parts, that advocate or counselor, some might call it your authentic self, and some might even say your Christ mind or the heaven within you. We want that part to be more in the driver's seat. Now, this is exactly the kind of revolutionary paradigm shift inside human consciousness that I'm going to talk about today. Today, I'm going to be shedding some light on a construct that's been pathologized by some and demonized by others. It is this idea that I've already leaned into of multiplicity of mind and the implications of that paradigm. It goes something like this. Are human beings made up of a single unified mono-mind, or are we in fact made up of a multiplicity of selves? Now, interestingly, in the US, we make this very clear. E pluribus unum, from the many, one. But this idea of unification translates into focusing on the commonality to the detriment of the difference, to the detriment of our biggest strength, our diversity. So how can we escape this binary construct of one versus the many with regards to consciousness, and why does it even matter? Well, let me start with the why it matters so that your diverse parts can have an opportunity to shift from what the heck is she talking about to being a tad bit more curious. You see, we all have multiple parts inside of us. Now, don't worry, I'm not advocating that we all have multiple personality disorder, and you don't have to call me Sybil or Eve. I just mean that human consciousness is likely more like what Walt Whitman called, we contain the multitudes. Dr. James Fadiman, author of Symphony of Selves and the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, which, yes, I have in fact read and actually applied both in my research. Anyway, Dr. Fadiman writes, it's really quite striking. We have a culture-wide adherence to an assumed unity of consciousness that rarely, if ever, exists, and a corresponding denial of what many of us already know to be the way things actually are. Now, I'm going to read that quote again in case you have a distracted part that shows up whenever a preacher starts quoting from text. We have a culture-wide adherence to an assumed unity of consciousness that rarely, if ever, exists, and a corresponding denial of what many of us already know to be the way things actually are. Now, maybe you have a part inside that's saying, well, denying reality feels pretty normal these days, Tamara, so that isn't too hard to believe given the circumstances. Have you even seen the movie Don't Look Up? Right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. It's frightening. Or another cultural reference, have you seen Pixar's Inside Out? This brilliant, yet a bit oversimplified understanding of our parts and how they can hop into the driver's seat or at the control panel. They had an internal family systems consultant on staff when they made that film, by the way, the very model that I'm actually trained in. And if you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. But if you've ever asked the question, why did I do that? You're already recognizing your parts and a core self. There's a part that did that, whatever that thing was. There's a part of you that's judging the part of you that did that. And then there's also a core self that's witnessing both of these experiences at once. So why would our culture, and by this I'm leaping ahead into human history, into US culture, why would our cultural system be so insistent and so invested in a single consciousness, in a unified mind? Why would we emphasize something that is so clearly countered in languages and cultures and experiences all around the world? Not to mention a concept that most indigenous cultures still hold. You see, a unified mind construct leads to a society where you can be solely defined by the worst thing you've ever done or the worst thing that's ever happened to you. It makes it easier to define who is bad and who is good. When what you are on the outside is the same as what you are on the inside, it makes it way easier to categorize, to appeal to you, to control you even. When the culture gets to define you by oversimplifying you into these binaries like good and bad and black and white and male and female and straight and gay and citizen and immigrant and educated and uneducated or sane and unsane, worthy or unworthy, normal or abnormal, it makes it so much simpler to decide who is in and who is out. You get this, right? I'll take a minute and invite you actually to name a few more of those binary oversimplifications, if you'd like, in the chat, which I can see. Or if there was one in the room that I didn't mention that you were thinking about and your system feels like it needs to say it so that it can get it out, please take a moment and speak those. What are the other binaries that we use here in our culture to decide who is in and who is out? Are there any that I missed?
Smart and dumb. Smart and dumb.
Ooh, smart and dumb.
Rich and poor.
Ooh, absolutely. Rich and poor.
Educated, uneducated.
Absolutely. Educated and uneducated.
City and rural.
Ooh, yes. Who lives in the city? Who lives rural?
Young and old.
Young and old.
Red and blue.
Absolutely. Red and blue.
Righteous and non-righteous.
Absolutely. These binaries that like make up who gets to be in and who gets to be out. Any others?
Which?
Oh, I missed that one. What was that one?
Good looking and not good looking.
No, that's so true. There are biases in that scenario too. Absolutely. Absolutely. Who's considered to be beautiful and who's not, right? Who's considered to have a symmetrical face and who's not? We talk about the pretty privilege, right? Ways in which people get lifted up ahead of things. Absolutely. Well, the thing about this, thank you so much for doing that with me. The thing about this is that this construct always leaves you needing an external redeemer, right? It signs you up for a relationship in that victim-oppressor paradigm, that rebellion paradigm that I mentioned at the very beginning. And if we monetize or determine value based on that body or your actions in that body that we have defined as good or bad or worthy or unworthy, a threat or not, then we've just entered into this capitalist carceral state, where the state can still make money off of those who are deemed unfit to contribute normally, quote unquote, to our economy. Where sometimes you're actually worth more if you are defined as sick or unhealthy or criminal and can be incarcerated or institutionalized. Or where someone can sell you the fix to your problem you didn't even know you had regarding your age or your weight or your body shape, or the ones that you actually do know you have. Maybe they'll sell you the cure to loneliness or disconnection or sadness. But that's all a lot of information that you probably already had an inkling for anyway, but it's kind of a lot. So just everybody take a breath with me. And let your parts know that may have just labeled me as Debbie Downer, that I will bring us back around to some hope shortly after the truth has been fully vetted. But one more trip down that slide. You see, Western culture and the cycle of the capitalist corporal carceral state begins to make money from our bodies in infancy. Think through this with me. Corn syrup, solid baby formula, denying the wisdom of a woman's body, for example. All this followed by a school system that feeds our children carbohydrate and corn syrup addicted processed food, fueled by industrialized big pharma and earth-raping fast food and restaurant suppliers. And all of this makes us physically and mentally and spiritually sick and dependent on the very system that betrayed us. Physically sick because we become diabetic, overweight, dependent upon pharmaceuticals. Mentally sick because we don't have the nutrients our body truly needs, so we become lethargic or angry or impatient or depressed or anxious and dependent on pharmaceuticals and professional support. And spiritually sick, disconnected from each other, our interdependence with the planet and all that's on it, from our ancestors, from our local soil or nature that can offer us relationship and healing, from the people around us. And then, my friends, they charge us exorbitantly for the higher level education that we would need to fully grasp all of this, which maintains that separation of class, but offers a small illusion of breakthrough possibility that's really just another way to force us to keep working for the very state that denied our humanity in the first place. That too was a lot. So take a breath with me. Okay, I'm done. I hope you have the full picture from my system's vantage point of what exactly we're dealing with. But what I'm trying to say is that what got us here, and by here I mean to this time and space and place, 21st century United States, where you can turn on the news and see these things, especially in southern states. This time and space where we legislate certain human beings' rights in this country and then we de-legislate it, where we have some progress and a lot of continued inequity, where not all people have the same access to safety and dignity and belonging. What got us here required a lot of resilience and hope and grit and innovation. And it also required dehumanization and genocide and subjugation. What got us here will not carry us into this next phase of the great American democratic experience. Now, I need to breathe. I have a part that's reminding me that what I'm saying is in fact dangerous in the place that I live and probably the place where you live too, especially since the Republican Party headquarters are right down the street from my house. Not that everyone, by the way, who votes Republican is that particular way, but extremists like to congregate near there. And I have another part who's very grateful to be invited to a church where we have a free pulpit and a free pew and where discourse and difference is supported. So you are welcome and even encouraged to disagree with me. And I have another part that wants me to run for office. And I have another part that thinks that running for office is absolutely the worst idea I've ever thought of if I'd like to survive this current political climate. And another part who's scared that this video will even be available on the internet. And another part of me who thinks that my entire self needs to remember that my values of inherent worth and dignity of every single person are absolutely worth speaking up for. And then my core self, this authentic self, that leader self, some might say my eternal self, this witness without an agenda, the part of me that is not bound by time, gathers up all my parts into like this imaginary circle in my head, in my heart mind, listens to each of these parts compassionately as they all run through their fears and their needs and their concerns and their pride, listening to each of them one by one, knowing their stories of how they were formed in my system based on my previous experience of needing to survive in a certain culture. Knowing that they're all just trying to help in some way and make sure that I have the information that I need to move forward that will keep me safe based on what they've learned. And that core self says, I totally get it, but we're also in the nonviolent speech and action, and we can be courageous and calm and creative in our solution seeking, and we can be clear and confident and curious in whatever the next step for us will be. And we will know when it's right to act and how, if we're willing to stay connected to each other, both internally and externally, and to a diverse external community, seeking out the experience of the exiled, those estranged by the culture's values. You see, wisdom is knowing what time it is. And liberation, actually begins in the mind. I want to make sure that you all can still hear me because I just saw that the screen went blank. Are we good? Okay. At the Restorative Justice Institute of Oklahoma, where I'm the founder and the Chief Unlearning Officer, our mission is to end the retributive and inequitable culture in our state. And Oklahoma is ground zero, but not that far away from Texas when it comes to these same issues. Now, we interrupt the cycle of violence by helping people know that they're not the worst thing that they've ever done, nor the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And we teach this multiplicity of mind concept to the community, to organizations, in schools. We want to remind people that we are all interconnected. We're not just bound to those whose DNA we share. We're also bound to the destiny of those to whom we've caused harm and their children's children. And what happens when wounds and harms go unaddressed in families and in communities? They become secrets, unspoken beliefs about ourselves and the world that fester in the silence and can turn into shame. And what happens when we hold generations of secrets or shame? It limits our experience of the world and our choices about how we see ourselves and others, so that we can in some way convince ourselves that we are, in fact, one of the good ones. And what got us here, an unconscious commitment to remain in the cycle of violence and shame culture, will not get us to the next successful phase of this country. Unless we stop rebelling, deny the victim-oppressor construct, and embrace our own and others' complexity, resisting this idea that we need to define other people's reality for them, we are in fact doomed to repeat history, stuck in a cycle of letting our defensive, wounded, shamed parts overcorrect or lead. Unless we can shift our perspective to address the needs behind those wounds, the needs behind that hatred, we will perpetuate the very same system. And so our revolution, or at least the one that I'm going to defend, is one of radical, inclusive love. One that sees beyond the hatred to the pain and the fear and refuses to oversimplify to one side or the other of a binary. One that recognizes when we're speaking from our fearful or angry parts instead of speaking for them from our core, authentic, grounded self. Let me give you an example of how you might respond to, I don't know, a neighbor, a coworker, maybe a family member's scared and hateful parts. It might sound something like this. I understand why this situation seems so ridiculous to you. Complexity is scary. And I know that expanding the understanding of the world you've always known is frightening. Even something as simple as knowing what bathroom to enter in public is becoming so vastly more complex. And I also know that you likely have an ungendered bathroom in your own home that you've successfully used your entire life. I really get that the basic facts that you've built your life on are feeling threatened, and that it feels as though your foundation is crumbling all around you. And I know you don't want to believe that. And I know that you're so scared that you're going to try and make rules to make sure that it doesn't happen. Lots and lots of rules and laws to try and keep that from happening. But it's not going to work. We have so much history and so many stories of people who resisted this that proves we are all have endowed rights by our Creator, that there will always be a revolution right around the corner when we try to legislate humanity in this way, and that your legislation is harmful to so many people that you are also supposed to represent. This morning, I want to offer you an opportunity to engage with your own system consciously, perhaps in a new way. I'm going to guide you in a short meditation to help you relate to your own system a bit differently. So if you're willing, I'd love for you to do this U-turn back to yourself. Close your eyes if you're willing. It's not necessary, but it does help you go inside. I'd like you to imagine someone who really gets you riled up. Someone who makes you angry, gets your goat, might even make you say or do something that ordinarily you would not want to say or do. Now, likely this is somebody who believes radically differently than you about something that you really care about. And when you're there, I'd love to see the congregation in the room. Just nod your heads with a yes and let me know that you're there. You've got that person in mind. Beautiful. Now, I want you to imagine that that person is in a room in your mind's eye, a completely contained room with a window. Now, this room is completely secure, and I promise we're not going in there, so you can tell your system you're completely safe. You're on the outside of that room, and you're looking in. You can see them, but they can't get out, and maybe they can't even see you. Now, as you watch them from the outside, have them say or do that thing that activates you, that gets your goat. And now, notice what's happening in your body and your mind as these protective parts of you come forward. Notice your breathing, your muscles, where you might be contracting or holding. How open or closed is your heart now? What kind of impulses do you have relative to looking at that person with this protector here? Do you find yourself wanting to flee? Do you have other thoughts coming in trying to distract you? Just notice and set them aside. And notice how this person looks to you in this state with this protector part here. Get a good felt sense of the impact of this protective part of you that leaks up to your defense with this person on your body and your mind. And then tell this protector part that you're not going into this room in this exercise. So it's safe for this protector part to stand down and relax a little bit. And let this part of you know that you're curious about it, inviting it to pull its energy out of you just a little bit so that you can get to know it better. And if it's willing, you might even notice a kind of shift inside your body if it does so. And if it's not, that's okay, it can stay. Let it know that you're just curious about it. And if it did relax some and you can notice that shift, pay attention to your body now. Your muscles, your breathing. How open is your heart now? Let your whole system know, just say it inside yourself, that you're safe, that you matter, that you belong, that you're strong, that you're creative, that you're enough, that you have resources, and that you're loved. And now that you're holding those feelings of safety and mattering, belonging, take another look at that person in that room through the window. Do they look different? How do you feel toward them now? And then if your protector part is loosened up some, in your mind's eye, turn toward that part of you that was protecting you and offer it some appreciation for trying to keep you safe. Let it know that you understand why it's trying to protect you in those moments. And just see if you can get a little curious about it. Ask this part of you why it jumps up so big with this person and what it wants you to know about that. And just wait for an answer. Don't try and force one. Now, this might be a bit foreign to many of you because we're asking our thinking part to kind of step aside to let our imagination unconscious lead. So don't try to force an answer or find one that fits. Remember, there's no agenda in this space, just calm and clear, waiting for something to emerge. And if this exercise evokes a part of you that feels that this is impossible or hokey or something else, just greet those parts too and thank them for showing up. They're trying to keep you safe as well. And then ask this protector part what it's afraid would happen if it didn't protect you in this way with this person or people like this person. And if it answered that question, see if you can offer it some appreciation for trying to protect you. Thank it. And then try asking, what would it take for this part to trust you, your leader self, your core self, to handle this person, using all of your skills and experience and tools? What would it need to let you remain in the driver's seat and handle this person so that it wouldn't have to? And then lastly, ask this protector what job it would rather have than defending you against this person or people like this person. And again, just wait for an answer. And then thank this protector for all that it let you know, and slowly begin to shift back into listening to sounds in the room, wiggling fingers and toes. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. My hope is that this offered you some insight. I invite you to keep honoring and respecting all of your parts. And if you want to work with them, with a coach or a therapist, I can recommend some people for you. I'm particularly fond of the IFS Institute, the Internal Family Systems Institute, where I've been trained. They've trained hundreds of coaches and therapists that you can work with, or you can also start with Dick Schwartz's book called No Bad Parts. I also have some coaching slots available for the fall if you want to work with a UU doing this work. But me and all of my parts have been delighted to be with you this morning. I hope that this time together has offered your system even more hope as you face all of the difficulties that you may in fact encounter in the upcoming week. I hope that it sparked a little bit of a fire of a revolution. Go and be blessed and be a blessing. Amen.